Hey friends, I'm Jenny D, and today I want to talk about D&D. What a surprise. I was chatting with some people on Twitter about D&D videos, and one of the things that came up a few different times actually was that even though receiving expert advice from experienced D&D players and experienced DMs is obviously really helpful and valuable, it's also nice sometimes to be able to hear from beginners and people who are still kind of finding their way so that we don't hold ourselves to these unrealistic standards as players or as DMs. I've been playing D&D for a little over a year now, and I still feel like I run into new obstacles all the time as a player too, not just as a DM. One of the things that makes D&D so unique is that it's a really long-term, really involved game. I mean, you can play a D&D campaign for literal years, which is a huge contrast to something like a board game that you can play in a few hours or a video game that you can play in a few weeks. But that's also one of the things that makes it so hard. It's complicated, it has complicated rules, you have to be really focused during long gameplay sessions, and you're playing with a group, so there might also be interpersonal challenges. And if you, like me, discovered D&D by watching really experienced people play the game really well on live streams or on podcasts, you might not be prepared for the things that you'll struggle with when you play. So I thought today I would talk about some of the things that have been challenging for me as a player so far. But first, let's talk about something that is challenging for DMs, which is maps. Putting together one or more new maps every single session, especially if you aren't entirely sure where your players are gonna go, that is hard, right? Not just me. This video is sponsored by 1985 Games, whom you have of course heard me talk about before, but before you skip ahead, they have 2 new books coming out. They just launched their latest Kickstarter yesterday, and it features 2 brand new Dungeon Craft books. In case this is your first time hearing about it, Dungeon Craft is a series of books of reversible modular terrain pieces that you can cut out and then make custom tabletop maps from. You can pick out the pieces and lay them out however you like for your games. You could make hundreds of different maps with the same pieces and never repeat a layout. All their books are loose leaf laminated cardstock, and each book has about 1,000 1-inch gridded pieces contained in it to choose from. I'll link my review of their book Hell and High Water in the cards in case you want to see the pieces in action. The 2 new books are Castles and Keeps and Cursed Lands. Castles and Keeps is exactly what it sounds like. It is maps related to castles and kingdoms and royal courts, both interior and exterior. And Cursed Lands was designed as a companion for Curse of Strahd, so tons of spooky, haunted demi-plane stuff. Just like their other books, each is $30, which we don't even need to compare that cost to 3D terrain because we don't want to cry today. Even better news, this Kickstarter also includes new 1-inch gridded battle maps that match the backgrounds of the pieces, so your maps will look even more cohesive, and they're only $10, and they haven't sent me one as part of this promo, so I am gonna go pledge for one. As a DM, it has made such a huge difference to me to be able to throw together a map at the last minute, even if my players go somewhere where I am totally not anticipating, which, let's be honest, they always do. The Kickstarter is live now, so make sure to check out the description for the link so you can get your copies. Now, back to your regularly scheduled content about stuff I'm bad at. Let's do a numbered list. The internet loves those. Here are the 5 hardest things about tabletop roleplay for me. Only knowing what your character knows. So when you're playing D&D, you are supposed to know only the things that your character would know, not the things that you as a player know. So for example, if somebody else at the table is doing something that your character wouldn't know about, but you as a player, you're sitting at the same table with them, so obviously you know. But if you make your character's decisions based on what you as a player know, but they wouldn't know, that's considered metagaming. It's bad form. This sounds like one of those things that's kind of obvious. Like you hear about it and you're like, oh yeah, of course, my character would only know the things that my character would know. But when you're actually playing, it can be really hard not to make decisions based on things that you know. I mean, just last week, my warlock Aisling left her familiar Nightshade behind to watch for something, to watch for a creature that was following them. But they ended up walking for like 5 full minutes before Nightshade saw anything, by which point they were well out of the 100-foot telepathic range that she has with her familiar. But she hadn't told Nightshade, oh, come back to us when you see something. She had told Nightshade, watch to see if you see something. So if Aisling had called Nightshade back immediately after Nightshade saw something, that would have been metagaming, because Aisling wouldn't know that Nightshade had seen something. So instead, I had to be like, well, I guess she waits like 10 or 15 minutes before she calls her back, by which point the creature had already caught up to them and was already attacking them. So any benefit they would have gained from knowing about the creature completely disappeared because because I didn't want to metagame. Most of the time, I think people don't want to metagame. They're not actively trying to cheat at D&D. I think it's just very, very hard to separate what you're thinking from what your character would be thinking, because you're playing your character. It's inextricably tied. I think DMs can help with that too in a couple different ways. I have two different players who I know watch Critical Role, so sometimes if they are going up against a monster that I know has appeared in Critical Role, I will reskin it visually or rename it or tweak some of its attacks or its weaknesses to make sure that they can't even unknowingly metagame knowing how to fight that monster most effectively. Staying focused. This one is hard for a number of reasons, not least of which is that I have ADHD. This is one of those things that I think it's very frustrating when your fellow players are not focused and you are, so you don't ever want to be the problem player who's not focused. Like if I look over and one of my players is checking Twitter on their phone, it's very frustrating for me as a DM, and it makes me feel bad, like I'm not doing a good job keeping players engaged. And then as a player, if it's somebody else's turn in combat and they didn't prepare and they weren't thinking about it, and you already know what you're gonna do, you're like, come on, man, stay on top of it. I've been playing online lately because of quarantine, and I've been finding that it's even harder to stay focused online than it is in person at a table. Sitting at my computer means that everything distractible about the internet is right at my fingertips. I've also found that once you lose focus, it becomes even harder to regain it, and D&D is only really fun when you're focused. It's not really a game you can play with half of your attention. For me, especially online, I think the key to keeping focus is just not letting myself get distracted in the first place. Don't even open a social media website for any reason. I also do this thing sometimes where I will intentionally distract myself with something that's only a little bit distracting to prevent me from getting distracted with something that's more distracting. For instance, when I was working on Thumbelina and I was sewing all of those flowers onto her skirt, I was doing that during D&D. I was hand sewing flowers during D&D, because that's one of those things that it distracts me enough that I'm not going to do something else, but sewing flowers isn't going to stop me from knowing what's going on in combat, because it only uses my hands, not really my brain. Remembering that you're not the main character. And the thing is, part of D&D is you're all the main character, but it's also partially that none of you are the main character. It's really important to not sort of hog the spotlight and try and make the game or the story all about you, but at the same time, you want to be engaged and you want to be involved in the story. I don't necessarily want to play with somebody who is just gonna take their turn in combat and respond to questions that are directed at them and otherwise do nothing. I used to write. I spent all the way to the end of college believing that I wanted to be a novelist and that was my main goal, so it's really hard to not play Aisling like the protagonist of a novel, because that's the kind of storytelling that I'm really used to doing. Good team playing, role playing is something where I know it when I see it. I could watch Critical Role and be like, wow, Sam Riegel is really, really good at playing his character in a way that helps others play their characters. But just because I see it happening doesn't mean I know how to do it. That's a skill that I would really like to build, because I want to be the kind of role player that I feel like I bring out the best in everyone role-playing with me, and I just don't feel like I'm there yet. Making my character not just me with elf ears. Now, this is not to say that there's anything wrong with someone who chooses to play themselves at the table. I feel like that's a completely valid way of role-playing. If you want to play you as a paladin or you as a warlock or whatever, then more power to you, it's your game. But me personally, I really do want to play a character that is different from me, that is her own self. And man, that is just really hard to do. It's really hard to separate why you respond the way that you respond to things and why a different person would respond differently. So okay, maybe me, if I were going into some dark cave, maybe I would be really cautious and I would scout ahead and I would look out for traps or signs of something dangerous. That doesn't necessarily mean that Aisling would do that. What about me and my life and my personality and my history has made me cautious? I have anxiety. Does Aisling have anxiety? Probably not. I was raised to be very careful and very cautious because my mom is that way. Aisling was raised by a different person than I was. So if the DM tells me that we're walking into a dark cave, my gut might tell me, okay, I look around to see if there's any signs of animals or people having been here before. But Aisling might not do that. She might not respond that way. In my mind, I feel like what's lacking and what makes that so challenging for me is that I don't feel like I have a full, complete grasp of what has shaped Aisling into the character that she is today. With the group that I DM, every session I give them a question before we start the session that's a character builder question. So it'll be something like, Who was your character's childhood best friend? What's the last nightmare that your character had? If your character existed in a modern high school setting, what kind of clique would they be in? Stuff like that, to just kind of challenge my players to think about their characters in a different context than maybe they've been thinking about them in the game. I've been trying to do stuff like that with Aisling and ask myself those kind of questions and fill in the gaps, because as of right now, I just have such a loose sketch of her background, and I feel like that's handicapping my ability to play her as a whole, well-rounded character. That's actually one of the reasons I want to do some videos that just kind of explore her character more deeply. Not jumping from point A to point Z. I think some of this falls on the DM and some of this falls on the player, but sometimes it can be really hard not to just sort of extrapolate the end point of the encounter or the plot or the puzzle and just go there. I don't want to play the kind of game where I say, she haggles, and then I roll persuasion. I want to play the kind of game where I say, good sir, I think we both know that your problems with the local thieves guild are going to be far more expensive than the, say, 20 gold discount you could give me for me not recounting your recent behaviors to them. And then I roll persuasion. Maybe with advantage because I had a really good point about the Thieves Guild. Like, you don't win D&D. It's not about rushing to the end point. For me, it's about the journey. It's about the story, not the ending. So I don't want to play the kind of game where I just jump to the ending of every single thing. I want to play the story. I want to play the journey. So those are the things that I have found challenging so far about tabletop roleplay. I would love to hear what you have found challenging. Please let me know in the comments what you're struggling with, and maybe read some other folks' comments and maybe give them some advice on what has helped you with the things that they're struggling with. Don't forget to check the description for the link to the new Dungeon Craft Kickstarter, and of course, make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell if you want more tabletop videos, because I have a few much requested videos lined up, like an interview with my elf warlock Aisling and a tour of my D&D journal, which I must say is #aesthetic AF.